Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges as he explores turning the page on his life and yours. Hey, Charlie.
Hey, Paul. Tell me something. Are you ready for yet another conversation about things that we're not supposed to talk about?
The show specializes in them.
Yeah, we've done religion and politics. We did why you can't. We didn't talk about religion and politics, but we talked about why you can't talk about religion and politics.
Right. You wouldn't let me talk about it.
Well, we're going a couple steps deeper today. And today,
literally, no pun intended here.
Today, I want to talk about death. So let's add politics, religion, and
wait
death.
Wait a minute. Let's just pause for a second. Listen to everybody clicking off right now here. Death is not something people want to talk about today here, Charlie.
Well, we'll see. And what I want to do is talk about dying and how we can best prepare for that inevitable event. And my special guest is an expert on the subject, and no, he is not a mortician. My special guest is an old friend who's changed his career, and he's now his name is Keith Page, and Keith is now a funeral celebrant that works closely with families in the midst of death. And Keith's focus is to prepare people of all ages on how to manage the process of dying. And we all admit that we're going to die, but no one wants to talk about it.
That's right.
And no one wants to deal with it, and no one wants to prepare for it. Just leave it up to the people. Before we begin, Keith, you sent me a little piece that I want to read that I think kind of sets the tone of what we're trying to do. And this was taken from the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, and also from a book titled "From Beginning to End: The Ritual of Our Lives." And it's a short reading. It's only 3 paragraphs, so it's quite interesting. And it begins, "Death is a vast mystery, but there are 2 things we can say about it. It is absolutely certain that we will die, but what is uncertain is when or how we will die. The only sure thing we have, then, is this uncertainty about the hour of our death, which we use as an excuse to postpone facing death directly." And that really is true. So instead of dealing with it as a normal part of life, death is treated as an unexpected emergency, something that happens when the medical community fails. We always die of something, as though if it weren't for the disease or accident, we could have lived on. But there's always going to be some disease or accident. And so he closes with this. Very often, those who take time to plan arrangements with death also end up having made new arrangements with life. Let me repeat that. I really like that. Very often, those who take time to plan arrangements with death also end up having made new arrangements with life, and we're going to discuss that in detail. And after they know they are going to die, people often live and die well. We don't talk about that. We debated on titling the podcast "Die Wise," and we need to talk about that impact of death on our life. And many start living well once they embrace the concept of death, either through it is imminent, or through, like me, I'm nearing 70 years old, and I know I'm entering the period people die, and everybody, and it's funny, Keith, everybody loves to tell me, "Oh, you got 20 or 25 years." Really? Really? The odds are going down.
Right.
So
are they trying to fool you or fool themselves when they say that? Right?
That's a great question, Keith.
For whose benefit are they really saying that?
That's a great question. Okay, let's get to it. And I always warn our listeners when I'm not as note prepared as normal, but that's because I know Keith and we've talked about this subject, and I think, we can spend plenty of time on it. Keith, welcome to the Next Chapter with Charlie.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Oh, it's so great. So great to see you. We haven't seen each other for so long, and you're, I consider you one of my better friends.
Thanks. Likewise.
So we'll have to get together. All right, let's get this show on the road. So why don't we begin with the simple question that I think will get us into the topic? What is it you do as a funeral celebrant and as a funeral
end of life guide? Are we talking about that?
End of life guide?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So what do you do?
Yeah. So the celebrant is primarily, the talking head, right? Funerals have, you can call them ministers, officiants, and now a newer term is celebrant, and you can hear that in the play on celebration of life. Part of the reason where that comes from is in secular cultures, they don't have as many religious ministers, but if you, like in New Zealand, if you were to go get married or buried, it would be done by a celebrant. They're basically secular officiants. So in our culture, we're having more and more families, irreligious families, not so much wanting a religious ceremony, but they're wanting some sort of ritual in the aspect of honoring the life of their loved one. So they're hiring me as a celebrant. So I usually get the call after their loved one's passed. So just, I'll talk about that for a minute, and then we'll switch gears, and then you can ask away. Yeah. So the celebrant, there are a number of mortuaries that know what I do, and they get phone calls and say, hey, we want you to serve our family. And so then they come and meet with the at the mortuary, and they say, "Hey, we need a speaker to lead this celebration of life." And the mortuary says, "Okay, do you have a pastor or someone?" And they say, "Oh no, we don't want a pastor. We don't want a religious person." They say, "Okay, well, we've got this person, Keith. He's a celebrant. He'll come and meet you at your home this week. He'll want to sit down with you and your family and maybe a few friends of this loved one." And he'll want you guys he'll need to get to know him or her through you guys. So what it becomes is a storytelling time. I walk into their home, I knock on the door, they know I'm coming, and I always say I walk in a stranger. I spend about 90 minutes to 2 hours just becoming this amazing, active listener. I become curious, I become caring about their loved one. It's like all of a sudden they've got a captive audience, and they go around the room. And Charlie, it's like they're all describing the same person, but they're describing it each from their own vantage point.
Are you taking notes?
And I'm taking notes. I bring this big, beautiful black book. I don't no electronics, so they don't see me open up my laptop. And I don't want any. It's kind of old school, right? Me, my Sharpie pen, this big black notebook, and I just say, okay, tell me more about that. And he was born here, and he's a war baby. He was 1932, and they just start to tell me the story. Sometimes it's migrating from other countries, right? So, anyways, all that to say, I get interested. And we walk through their life, their journey. And by the end, I'm saying, tell me, is there anything else we missed? What other hobbies? What other interests? At the end, I would say, tell me ultimately about his character. Like, what were the lessons of life that you learned from him?
Oh, that's great.
Right?
That's great.
And then lastly, I say, hey, did he have a spiritual nature about him? How did he view life? How did he view God? All those things. Because at the end of the funeral then, or the celebration of life, I do some sort of release, which we can talk about. So that's what I do. So, and then when I leave 2 hours later, Charlie, they hug me, and it feels like I've been adopted into their family simply because I've listened. Right.
And they've had a chance to release. Well, we'll get into that in a bit. They've had a chance to release all of these pent-up things about their loved one that they've not expressed and not thought about, and then the funeral details. I'm sure that.
Yep. The end of it, I say, let's go over the details. Let's actually create a sequence of events. Oh, well, we have a video. Great. Oh, well, his grandchildren, you learned to play the violin, and they've prepared a little thing they want to play. Awesome. And I talk to them about the sequence of events, kind of the flow. And then I go home, and let's say I've got 4 or 5 days, maybe a week and a half. Then I begin to take all those notes and digest them and process them and enter them into a...
How do you determine what stays in and what comes out?
I look for threads, But primarily, I look for a number of things. Number one, I want to be Number one, I want to be real and authentic. Number two, I like it to be interesting. And the way it's interesting is if I get interested. So I have to look for some of the themes that interest me. I try not to make stuff up. I don't try to like add too much artistry. I have some celebrant friends, and they're really great at, I think, the artistry part. And I feel like my best is to take
the artistry part.
They'll take themes about the person's life and really build into that theme and maybe almost metaphors. So the person was a mason, and so then the mason, and then they'll maybe paint this beautiful picture of what a mason does. And you know, they go more into, what would you call it? It's not what the family said. It's almost like me as the listener. It's almost my beginning to interpret what they said. And I try not to do that. I try to mostly give them back what they said, but in some sort of organized, creative manner. But I'm not adding new content, right? There should be nothing they've heard. They should hear nothing that day that other than, oh, wow, that is true. We did say that. But like aha moments, but not like, well, where did Keith get all that? He's making stuff up now.
Yeah, he's talking about somebody else. So you have I think now it's as good a time as any. You explained to me earlier that there are sort of 3 principles or 3 phases that you run through as you're working with the family. Is that right?
Right.
Is this when this is occurring? During this 2-hour meeting? Yeah,
it's they don't. I let them know that, but it's not really happening as much then. I just let them know that the day of the funeral is typically broken into 3 sections. The first is a time of remembering. The second is a time of reflections. The third is a time or a ceremony or the ritual of release.
How do you differentiate remembering and reflection?
Yeah, remembering is like let's think of the remembering as the beautiful eulogy, right? That often, it's from birth to death. Here was their life. Here's who they were. Here are the things they did. Here's who they married. Here's who the children they had. Here were their, right? And that's my part. That's me taking all of the notes from that 2-hour meeting and writing this beautiful story / eulogy. And I kind of get to tee up the service by saying, we're here to remember John. And John, right, and all this, and I go through it. And it's maybe 15 to 20 minutes long.
Do you, if someone, let's say someone was, didn't have that hero's journey and didn't have, the great life, was, had a lot of quirky, jerky parts of the life. Do you mention any of that and how they've overcome that? And
yeah, I do.
So you're a truth teller.
Big time. And people admire that and appreciate that. I say, look, I don't make him a saint. I don't make him a sinner. I make him human. I love that. Right? I said, let's just make them human. They had rough edges. God, let's talk about otherwise they're going, who the hell is he talking about? He's not, if they're telling me, especially if they're talking about he was sarcastic or he had an angry spur or he was Irish or he could drink or he could cuss like a sailor. Well, I'm going to use the very things they said. I don't need to go make stuff up. Like, that's beautiful. I'm going to say he cussed like a sailor, and then when I'm getting to know them better over those 2 hours, I might say, tell me more of, was he always a cusser? And I'll just dive into stuff they tell me. It's just all about getting interested in a person's story. That's so beautiful because I read and I should have done the research. I read 2 science fiction novels. And the first one was this kid who thought he was playing a game. Thought he was playing a Battlestars Battle War game, and he was like only 9 years old, but he was super genius. Okay, and he was the only one in the world that was ever able to defeat the enemy to win this game. Oh wow! And it turned out not to be a game. It was real. It was real. Is that Ender's Game? Ender's Game. Yes, yes. I was going to say End Game, but Ender's Game. Did you read the second book? No. The second book, he becomes what you are. Is it becomes a truth teller at funerals or at dying ceremonies, death ceremonies. All right. And he will talk about warts and all. Yeah. And it was just really, really well accepted in the book that it said that people like that. But I've never heard of a celebrant or officiant doing that. They always
I told, my friend Terry Hershey is going to do my funeral.
Okay.
I think him in another way, but I told Terry, the one thing I want you to tell people is Charlie wanted me to make sure you knew that he was not an effing saint.
They will already know that.
Yeah, and he said, and if you're surprised that he used the word effing, then you didn't know him very well.
Right. Like no one should be surprised, unless they hadn't seen him forever. And, but like those that are going to come to remember you, they want the truth. And if a minister or an officiant's up there and they haven't done their homework, they haven't fallen in love with that person, they're going to do a shitty job. And I tell families right away, you can trust me. I mean, right from the get-go, I say, I'm going to honor your dad's story. I'm going to tell it well. And I promise it will flow through the stories I have to rely on them. I didn't know him. But by the time I'm done, I feel like I've gotten to know someone new in life.
Yeah, and you have such empathy and compassion. You're such a caring person that it exudes from your personality.
Yeah.
So I can see why that works so much. So now, so we talked about remembering.
Okay, yes. And then reflections.
Reflections.
And that's where then, because family members, we do want them involved in the service. The more that they are engaged in the process, the more they're preparing for their own grief. I mean, they're preparing for they're helping the grieving process by reflecting, by getting up and saying some words or putting it in writing and letting someone else read the words. They're paying tribute and honoring a life that they loved or that they knew very well, right? And so that during the reflections is when family members, friends get up and say
their
2,
piece.
3, 4, 5 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes families say, we would like you to open it up. We don't know if anyone will come up. We say, hey, 2 family members are going to share, and then Keith, can you just open it up for people to share? I say, absolutely. And I set it up real nicely saying, this is an opportunity to come tell a story, a favorite memory, a character quality of this man. And,
So
that's reflections.
we've got remembering, reflections, and I'm very intrigued by release because we talked about that, and that seems to be something that is so missing in our cultural thinking, but also in ceremonies that I've been to. Yeah. Some Christian ceremonies talk about release, that they're now in a better place,
right?
Which always,
as if we know,
But they do talk about that there is some release to that. But many places it's just kind of they don't really let them go,
right?
And we need to let them go for our own sanity. Otherwise, I imagine it really has detrimental psychological effects on us.
Absolutely. They in fact, if you looked and listened to the TV show Hoarders. The people that hold on to everything, typically when they dive deep down, they've had some sort of traumatic loss that never went processed. And so when we don't process our loss, also known as our grief, stuff bubbles up, We were meant to feel the feelings and process them. So release might add some aid and at least a visual. So what I do at the end of the service, I have everybody hold out their hands. And I even say if they want to close their eyes, they can. And it's really interesting what happens here. I'll tell you about at the end the kind of feedback I get. And I'll say you can hold out your hands. And I say it just like this. Let's say we're going to release my dad, whose name is John. I say, life, our hands are open for 2 reasons. First, as a posture of gratitude, we say thank you for sharing John with us all of these years. You brought him to the world in 1943, and our lives are better because he was here. So thank you, life. And then secondly, life, our hands are open now to release John. We released his body into the grave or into to the ashes. We recognize that his spirit is in eternity, or the family sometimes gives me words that they believe where the spirit is. And I say, and we release that spirit now. And then at the end, I say, now put your hands over your heart. I say, because even though we've released the body, released the spirit, we promise we get to hold on to the memory of John forever in our hearts, right? I don't say Lord, I don't say God, I don't say amen, and I'm not trying to sneak anything in because, I don't have a strong one way or the other. I don't know. But at the end of the ceremony, always I'll have religious people come up and they'll wink and they'll go, "Hey, way to sneak in that prayer." And they really have interpreted, right? They've interpreted what I did
through their filter
as a prayer, and they're really grateful that I got that in, and they feel better, right? And then at the very same service, Charlie, non-religious people come by and they go, "My God, thank you so much for not making that a religious service." And then they hold out their hands and they go, "This release thing was so cool." So what do you make of that? What is this, Charlie? What is that?
Answer that question. What is that?
I think it's part of the human condition of we as humans make meaning ourselves.
Oh,
we are
absolutely
right, and so
absolutely.
we're just so it's whatever we make it out to be.
We create our meaning,
but we stop and do it together, and it became we had a ceremony together in that moment.
Yeah, a communal,
right. And I just said, and I was just speaking to life, the life force, the life that brought John here, for instance, right? And so, man, this is, I've done a lot of different kinds of cool, fun work over my 30 years of nonprofit and church and coaching, but this, for me, has and is become some of the deepest, most rewarding, most penetrating work I've ever done, for sure, by far.
Well, I can't imagine anything more emotionally taxing than death of a loved one and people dealing with that.
Yeah.
And then dealing with people that we will talk about in a bit, people that know they're dying and you're working with them.
Right.
You work with them beforehand to help them do that process. I have a question that sounds obvious at the onset of it, but I think it's much more complex in that how have we come to the place where we can't, like religion and politics, we can't talk about death. People don't die. They pass away, and I personally refuse to use that language.
Right.
I personally refuse to use they didn't pass away, they died.
Yes.
What do you mean they passed away? Passed to what? They're dead.
Right.
They died. What?
Or we call up, we say, we want you to know we lost Dad last night. You're like, well, where the hell did you lose him? Right? We should go find him if you've lost him.
Yes.
Why did we say we lost them?
Yeah.
Right? They're still here. They're still with us.
But this is really sort of a newer phenomenon, isn't it? Like maybe the last 50 years, 30 years? I mean, there's been a movement, in so many ways in our culture to outsource things, right? I mean, in some ways you could say with some of the, even in the churches, I used to be a youth pastor. It's like, it seems as if the parents are outsourcing the spiritual development of their children to us, right? In hopes that, the professionals will help our kids follow Jesus better and be good Christians, right? Do we outsource morality or and so the funeral business came along and said, people are dying, we can help you. And it became an industry. A very much a growing industry, and somewhere along the way they said, let us as the professionals do it, step aside, we'll handle this. And I think as a culture we said, okay, great, one less thing for me to have to deal with. Unfortunately, to not deal with death and dying is the big second half of that goes kind of along with birth and living. And the industry has just slowly allowed us to kind of delegate that, hand that off to them, dust our hands off, and think we can walk away. Sort of make it a non-event.
It becomes definitely a non-event. And so then there is no ceremony. And where there is no ceremony, then there is no marker for the death, which, it's just, it's a troubled time then. So
that's yeah, I can see. So you say it's that we delegated it to someone other than the family, like you were talking about. Tell me at lunch you were telling me about parlor and living spaces.
Oh yeah, so we had the parlor room of the house, and that's where the word funeral parlor. But I think that parlor used to be in a home itself. And the parlor was, either the front room or some kind of, I don't know, but it was a part of a house. And that's where the body was laid at rest for up to even a few days. And it was not laid to rest. It was, what do they call it? Lie in state, right? It was like a place of honor for up to a few days. And people could come and visit, and they would walk into the parlor and see Uncle Bob and view his body, and then they would go into the other room where everyone was gathered, and that was called the living room, the room for the living. Well, then the funeral.
So that's where living room came from?
That's from my understanding. That's the living room. So you had the parlor.
No kidding.
Yeah.
No kidding.
Right. So then the funeral industry comes along, and they start funeral parlors.
But not funeral living rooms.
Right. And so now, mortuaries are trying to get with it, and now they even have the great room and the family room, and that's where they do some of their events rather than, the old stale, chapel.
Okay, I want to go to two different things, and I think we probably need to take a break, but this is another show that I feel like, holy cow. So let's go to a break, and then we'll get right on.
Perfect.
This is Charlie Hedges, and you're listening to The Next Chapter with Charlie. And I am here with my very special guest, Keith Page, who is, I have a difficult time figuring out exactly what to call him, a funeral celebrant, a funeral officiant, but he also does a lot of teaching, and we're going to talk about this. He does a lot of teaching on dying, and I'm looking at it, there's two phases to this, well, three phases to this teaching. One phase is, I'm 69 years old. I know every year the odds increase that I'm going to die. And I don't have a problem with that. I have accepted death as part of my life. Now, if you were a doctor and you were to tell me I was going to die in a year, I could have a whole different answer response to this, but the way I'm feeling now. So there are people like me that accept death, and so I'm wondering what you say to them. Mm-hmm. And then there's also the people that have just discovered that their death is imminent. It is through some kind of disease, or typically something medical, and your job is to help prepare them for that. How do you prepare people like me, and then people who are, I'm sure there's something different to those that are facing imminent death?
Yes. So let me preface saying the celebrant thing I've been doing years and years and years, and this end-of-life guide, as we call it. Some use the term, it's a funky term, but it's called a death midwife, or a death doula is another term. Just like there's a birth doula or a birth midwife, now there's a death doula.
I'll take doula. I'm
doula,
not sure.
Midwife.
I'm not sure. The midwife is
right. So, and that's newer to me, but I'm slowly learning it, and I've had a privilege to walk that journey with a few people already. And I'll tell you how it is with you. In some ways, you're easier, and I'm glad we reconnected, because this is a fun thing for me to practice with you, because you're willing to have the conversation, know that you're at some point that we're all terminal, right? And you're going to die. And you said, hey, I think I've got maybe 60 or 70% of my stuff together already, as far as I know. And, it'll be fun for us, and maybe even on air, we'll talk about some of the things that we call it, let's create a death file. And in that death file are a number of items that everyone really, we suggest they have. And now there are even people.
Do you have that documented? Do you have that?
Yes. Yeah.
I'm going to have to make sure we get your contact information because I'm sure there's people that's going to want to know this.
Oh, yeah. And they can go, my name is Keith Page, so it's keithpage.org. And
it's P like a piece of paper,
Page in a book.
P-A-G-E. No.
Yep. Which is funny when you say, hey, we're turning the page or something today. And I was like, man, this is good. We're turning the page that symbolizes death. We're turning the page which symbolizes Keith Page. I'm like, I was meant to be here.
Okay.
So we could talk about what all goes in that death file. And for someone like you, you're going to be curious, interested, and maybe leaning in, right? Because you're comfortable. You said you've been on this dance, kind of aware of and open to the dying. You said up to maybe 10 years.
Yes,
right?
Very much.
And I'd be curious if, to ask you is, do you think that in being aware of and acknowledging that, has it impacted the way you've lived these last 10 years?
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
In what ways?
It's that, I don't want to call it a bucket list because I don't have a bucket list, but I have an impact list.
Okay.
And I have a legacy that's important for me. That's not a legacy that's important that Charlie Hedges is remembered for forever, but my deeds somehow go on. That I do good deeds that are passed on.
Yeah.
And knowing that I'm nearing the age when people die, or not nearing it, I'm in the middle of it.
Right.
It has helped me to focus on that, and it's helped me to really understand what my purpose is in life, and that I need to live more purposefully and more intentionally, and then even. But it doesn't mean, Keith. It doesn't mean that I need to be more active,
right,
and or more proactive in doing things. It just, even when I'm sitting down reading, I'm just understanding what a privilege it is to sit down and read. And I told you I'm in this big study right now of a biblical concept that's a very difficult biblical concept. But, I've got my Greek Bible out, and I've got my, I've got all sorts of things trying to figure this out. So it has changed. It is, I guess it's made me more intentional.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, when all of a sudden we do all know that there is an end point, and we are moving fast. It feels faster and faster toward that end point. It begins to say, well, then how do I want to aim the arrow of my life towards some sort of bullseye or towards some sort of target in these last years? And that's all about intentionality.
Right.
And it also sounds like, Charlie, that when you are reading, I heard you mention the word gratitude, which I think people that are aware they're dying aren't depressed. They're actually grateful for each day.
So these are the people that are told that you have X amount of time to live.
Even you. I mean, you don't know how many days you have, but you said that you have gratitude.
Yes.
So I'm thinking
absolutely.
You must have gratitude because you know you're going to die. You're not in denial.
Yeah.
Right?
And it's not like something that's on my mind all the time, but it is.
It could be.
It's more.
Get that skull you talked about.
Yeah, it's more. I know. It's more on my mind than most, certainly, and that is what I talked about. That I am jealous of the philosophers of 200 and 300 years ago. They were known to have a human skull on their desk
totally.
To remind them that they're going to die, and what they want to do is important. And I think I've mentioned before, I looked up trying to buy one, and they're like $2,000, but you can get a plastic molded one for $300 or $400, and I say, no, man, I want a real dead guy. So
I wonder if I could deed mine to you if I go before you. Save you $2,000, man. Awesome.
It says, are you ready to give body parts?
Right.
Yeah, I'm ready to give my skull.
Yeah, skull goes to Charlie Hedges.
So okay, so.
Do you want to know what goes in the death file? I can just do a quick run by. Or do you want to hit the terminal illness person?
I want to hit the terminally ill person, and then I want to hit the death file because I think that's important, and that'll probably come close to wrapping up our time.
Okay, so the terminally ill person, first they have to usually get over the shock maybe of a diagnosis, right? And so the idea, though, is that I come along and and say, hey, we still don't know how long you have. Okay, so the doctors, gave you some sort of timing, and this is not obviously in one meeting, but I begin the journey of walking with them. I like the word accompany, right? I mean, if we could imagine for a minute, you or a close friend of yours, right, having a terminal illness, and me saying, I want to walk this journey with you, and I'll walk all the way up to the very threshold. But ultimately, when the threshold is there, Charlie, you will have to walk that ahead of me. And actually, you will be my teacher at that point, and I will be your student, and I will watch and learn from you. So it's a real humility. I'm a witness and an accompanier and a gentle presence. We call it holding space. So I hold space to live with you in the doubt, in the question, and then say, what kind of legacy would you like to leave? If the doctor just gave you 6 months. Could we do a project in 6 months? Could we do a writing project? Could we do a video project? Could we, I've got people now that are able to come in and sit down with that person and videotape their life story in their own words. Usually, remember a few minutes ago I said the celebrant, I have to go in and get it from the rest of the family. Imagine if they know they're dying and I can bring in so-and-so's video team and we sit with that person and we capture it in their...
Do you help them script it out?
Sure.
That's amazing. So the family could listen to my last words.
Not only the family, the great grandkids who will never know you.
Oh my goodness!
Right, and with clouds, we put it all in the cloud.
How many people are doing that?
Not enough. And now I found out there's an app. There's a little app, a simple free app called where is it? Record Me Now. And it's a little kind of cheesy version. It's free, but it asks you your phone. You point your phone at your face. A question comes up. You hit video record, and it says, "Where were you born and what hospital?" And you just video it, and you just talk right into it, and then it archives it, and it asks all these questions, and you can almost build your own little personal video just by doing that.
No kidding.
So, anyways, the key isn't so much what they do, but it's helping them feel like they've crossed the T's, dotted the I's, because there's some important, they say there's 5 things we all need to say before we die, if and when we have time, right? And one of those is, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the things I've done. The secondly is, I forgive you and or others and even myself. So there's this apologizing and forgiveness that we need to do. The third is, thank you. The fourth is, I love you. And the last is, goodbye. Now, that may be literally saying those words, or there may be moments where they're with their loved ones, but it's just helping them begin to be the person that are saying those types of things as they're preparing to die.
I love that. How does that impact the person who's saying that?
Well, what do you think? I mean, peaceful. They're content. They're peaceful. They're whole. They're integrated. They're dealing in reality now because they're talking really about the most important stuff, which is relationships. And if we can get ready, so now I want to start working with people who aren't yet dying, that don't know they're terminally ill, people like you and I. Imagine if we could start training people to learn what they need to say before they die. We can learn to say it now. So it changes how we live.
So it changes, and it's really, I like the use of the word relationship because it changes our relationships. I just saw a TED Talk by the second guy in charge of Harvard. This Harvard study that's lasted 75 years,
yes.
Where they've and it's all with men, and they've started including wives,
mm-hmm.
and
about happiness, right?
Yeah, what it takes to be happy, and they just said 100% is just without fail say relationships. It all comes down to relationships, and so you're talking about encouraging and building relationships, but also ones that last. These are my final words,
mm-hmm.
and so that probably also gives me intention in my life as I'm saying these words to these people, does it not?
Absolutely, right. And those are brave words, right? Those are loving words. So it's happening at so many levels. I mean, it's happening in you, and then it's happening in the people that are hearing you, and then they're probably saying it. Well, they're saying, "I love you too, Dad."
Yeah, I hear, what I hear wonderful things from is, and I know this is really getting near death, hospice and the impact of hospice on people that are dying. And is that part of the process of?
Yeah. Hospice is phenomenal, and hospice brings a whole team of support because they bring nurses, they bring social workers, they bring chaplains, and together that team is like a team of care. I'm actually a volunteer for hospice, and so sometimes they.
So do you go to the person's house, or do they come to a?
No, we go directly to wherever they're at. Some are in facilities like
Sure.
a skilled nursing
Sure.
or a private home.
Sure.
Yeah,
Sure.
so we go and visit them and sit with them, and sometimes we're just relieving the caregiver so they can get out for an hour or so once a week by us being there. So I do that for a woman right now. And so then I'm not wearing the hat of death midwife. But if I was a death midwife, if a family had brought me in, then I would be working alongside hospice, kind of filling in the gaps where, because a chaplain's going to make a visit once a week, once every few weeks. And some families don't want chaplain. Chaplain kind of refers more to usually a religious person, where a death midwife, death doula may or may not be religious at all. May not come from that reference point.
And certainly is more educated on it because, as a minister, I was never educated on how to do funerals.
Right, me either.
I just had to figure it out myself, and I probably did a pretty crappy job. I mean, people would always tell me, "Oh, that was a wonderful service," and I'm thinking, wonderful service. I kind of made it about me,
right. Right.
and I don't know about that, but okay. So what I think I'd like to conclude with is I love your term, the death file. That's sounds like a TV series.
Yes, right. Like X-Files.
Like X-Files, yeah. The death file.
So there are even parties that are people like me and others are throwing called death file parties, where you get people together and they know that they're going to come to a gathering in somebody's home or something, and actually begin to learn what a death file is and how to have all the paperwork needed to complete their death file, and they sometimes even do it over dinner. So it kind of lessens the mood. Have some food, have some wine, and then get comfortable, and then
maybe lots of wine,
and then talk about what all goes in the death file. So here are some things. Number one is you've heard of the health directive. Usually, if you go to the hospital,
right.
So that's got all the paperwork of do you want a DNR? When at what point do you want a feeding tube? Do you want heroic measures? All that. So that should be in the
and we
file.
Did all that with our trust.
Right, yep. And now my mentor has created what's called a death directive. And so that's basically saying upon death, have you already selected a mortuary or a cremation center? Would you like to have a ceremonial bathing after death? So one of the things we do now is to help families get comfortable with even their loved one having died, is just give them a chance to use essential oils, frankincense, myrrh, right, and wash.
Is that a religious? Does that fall under more religious people doing that?
Some do, some don't. And
is it Eastern? Is that
very much Eastern? Very much Eastern, and the Mormons do a great job of that.
Oh.
And what I'm finding is I've just begun to implement that and see families do it, and it is such a loving, tender moment, and it helps them because when my dad died in 2009, he died and he was in his recliner chair. My mom and I were sitting there, and we knew he died. He had lung cancer. He had a long battle. He was on hospice the last 6 months, and I was there for his last breaths, and then he died. And we said, "Oh, I guess he's dead. Let's call so-and-so mortuary," and they came in 2-minute suits, got him, and said, "Would you like a couple minutes?" Okay. And then they put him on a metal table and zippered him up in a bag and took him out to the van, and I never saw his body again. And what I didn't know, and I know now, is we could have had a moment. We could have created ceremony. My mom could have got on the phone, called my sister who was a few miles away. She could have come over. We could have taken off Dad's sweatpants, clothed him, cloaked him, appropriately, and then just washed his body. From his feet up to his body, to his torso, his chest, his arms, his face, his hair.
I just read about this. I can't recall where I read about this, but I was not familiar with that.
It's newer. I mean, it's old. It's so old that it's new again, right?
Okay.
I mean, all of our ancestors did these things. And then it's, there was some sort of, because the families buried the bodies out on the farm.
Right.
Or in the village. There was a
Right.
place where the indigenous people all did it together. We know where the bodies are buried. We knew what to do. Now we know to pick up the phone. Right? So as a death midwife, I come in now and say, we can wash the body. Now, get this, Charlie. We have families that want the body to lay in state for up to 3 days. We've learned how to put the body on dry ice. So we actually, in a bed or on a couch or on a massage table, we cloak it, we shroud the body or have the body dressed, and this would all be in their death directive. And people can lay in a state of honor for a day, 2 days, 3 days, and people can come by and have vigil. Because the Buddhists believe it takes 72 hours for the spirit to break away from the body.
Isn't it interesting that it fits the Christian motif of Jesus?
Days. Yeah, 3 days before ascending, right?
Yes.
So the Buddhists believe that the body should not be left alone. So upon death, they're there, they bathe the body, shroud the body, and they sit with the body. And what happens when we do that is we begin to realize that that person wasn't just the body. The body truly has died. And it helps us in our grieving, helps it make it real. Because the body's just not in an hour, take it off in the van, and we're like, where the hell did the body go? I don't know. It was all a blur. That's what we say. It was a blur. And we don't feel it. What if
So that would be done in the death directive, and so the family would know how to handle that?
Yeah, and they would say, we want so-and-so to be, Keith, to be our death midwife, and he's going to come and oversee it. And I don't do it for the family. I'm the equipper. I'm the empowerer of the family.
Okay.
Right? So all that happens in the death directive. Then it says, do you want to be cremated? Do you want to be buried? Do you want a home funeral? We do a lot of home funerals now where they don't want the big, where do you want to be buried? All those things. And more, as you and I talked at lunch, more burial options from there's even green burials now. There's obviously cremation. Now there's burial at sea. Soon, as we know in Washington State, there's a movement, I think it was in the press today, about wanting us to be human compost, right? Which we make really good compost. We don't make good compost when we're cremated. People think then we're just ash.
Right.
And we actually suffocate the plants. But
Right.
if they actually composted us, we would be incredible fertilizer.
Whoa.
Your eyes just got
Okay.
weird on me.
Okay, so we got death directive. What
Yep.
else do we have?
Ethical will. An ethical will is basically like your legacy. It's like those questions somebody should be asking you about what were the most important values of your life, Charlie. Charlie, what were the 3 key events that marked your early childhood that you think made you a man? There's like 30 or 40 questions that you could answer. You don't have to answer them all. You could answer 1 or 2. But it's basically, it's learning about you, and you could answer those, or someone could draw those out of you, and that would go into your death file. Also, people want to write letters to their loved ones, not to be opened until after they die, right? They want to write blessings. So those could be in envelopes with the person's family members' names on it, sealed in envelopes. That could be in there. Also, people now want to plan their memorial service. They don't want to take a chance on somebody doing whatever they want. So they plan their memorial. They say, I want so-and-so to speak. I want this music played. I want that video that we recorded of me, that 10-minute where we brought in that video group. I want that 10-minute video played because I say some things to my friends and family. Dude, that's getting comfortable with our death. And I guarantee you, people who die that way, I call it dying consciously. Aware that we're dying. I'm living consciously so that I can die consciously.
That's great. That's great. Okay, so we've got the death directive,
Health directive, death directive, ethical will, any will or trust that people have, obviously, and then funeral memorial service notes, desires, requests, music selections, all those things.
Yeah, I've got my music selected.
Yeah, what is it? 9 Inch Nails.
It is Pilgrimage. I don't know if and I don't know if it's for the going in or coming out.
Maybe both.
And then there's and I just saw them last night. There's the Snow Patrol called Lifening. That just talks about being a good dad and.
Oh, really? Okay,
Yeah.
I like Snow Patrol. I'll have to check that out. That's
Yeah.
on Lifening.
Yeah, they're great in concert, by the
Really?
way.
All right.
They were incredible.
It's great.
So what else?
So those are the main things that go into a death file. I'm sure I've left something off, but when I was
Well, what about what I was thinking about? So we need I know my wife and I have not done this, and we need to be aware, to be conscious of where the essential paperwork is.
Right.
So we need to know where the trusts or wills, where the deeds are.
Yeah. And then codes, passwords.
Passwords,
right.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I mean, without passwords, you're...
Right. Any special instructions? I read about one woman that knew that she had grew old and she had so many people that had died, and at the 6-month mark or the year mark, she felt lonely because only she was remembering the date. So when she started having loved ones die, she would make notes in her calendar to send them flowers a year later. So when she died, she had directives for the florist to send, on the 1 year mark, to send flowers to all of her own family members.
No
and she
kidding.
put those in the notes. So they were receiving flowers from her a year later.
Is it just let's wrap it up, and what I want to do is ask you, is it just denial? Is that why we ignore this? I mean, this is essential. What you're talking about is, I mean, it's just absolutely essential. I mean, it's
right. It almost sounds like common sense.
Yeah, and yet I can even feel myself saying, "Okay, I'll do that tomorrow."
Yeah. Right.
And
that's why the dinner parties, things like that, having hiring someone like me to help them do that. It's like a coach, right? We typically aren't going to go get an exercise unless we spend a little money to do it. It's like, where else are we going to find motivation? And we do things better in relationship.
Oh, so you will come out and work through these death directives and do all of that.
I didn't mention that. Yes. Obviously, they're more motivated usually upon a terminal illness. We help them get ready. But I want to start to take it to everyone, not so much because I need the business, but because I'm seeing the impact on shaping how people live. Some of the most vibrant people I know are the ones that are, like yourself, that are more comfortable with and aware of that we're all finite.
And that is, I think that's the important point to this whole podcast, is that we, with the opening up of the dialogue regarding death and making it not quite so toxic, and that we don't dare talk about it, and yet it's just going to happen. The more we deal with it and have that handled, it would seem remarkably relieving to know that it's handled, to know my family's taken care of.
Right.
That I've done some good things for my family, and written these letters, and which I would probably rewrite every year.
Right. You can revisit them. There's no reason why. People revisit sometimes their wills and trusts because things change, circumstances change. So any final words of wisdom that you have for me here, Keith? Well, just that there's such a movement around this that there are now things called death cafes. There are 6,000 that are happening around the world. Started in London a number of years ago. A death cafe is a free invitation for people to gather in a public setting where cake is served, coffee, and an open, uninterrupted conversation around death. And we have one now at my loft.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, once a month. The last Wednesday of every month, we have Death Cafe. It's like a recovery group meets.
And how many people come?
We've only done 2. We had 18 the first time, 13 the second time, and people loved it. And people are inviting people to Death Cafe. It's 90 minutes long. You come. It's not scary. It's not spooky. It's treats and snacks and sit in a circle, and people talk about their curiosities, their fears, their interests around death and dying. And nobody fixes them, no crosstalk, no advice giving, and none of us act as professionals. So I don't put on a hat of, hey, I'm Keith, I'm the death guru, and I do Q&A. I get 3 minutes or 4 minutes of open share just like anybody else, just like you would at like a recovery meeting. Deathcafe.com, I think, is the global site. And if people want to check them out anywhere where they live, because I know this podcast goes out all over the world, so people can go and click on. And if they don't have one and they want to start one, you can start your own. But otherwise, we have one in Orange County.
Well, that's great. And your contact info is keithpage.com?
.org. Yep.
Oh, my producer's dying to say something. I'm really
You better let him,
scared.
because
I just
really
have
scared.
to say this. It's been raining throughout this interview. It just stopped as you concluded, and there's a rainbow behind you.
man. Look at that. I love it.
How about that?
Noah would be proud.
Okay, Keith Page, thank you for being my guest today.
Thank you so much. Love seeing you. Love spending time with you.
Now we've already told how people can get a hold of you, and I'll put in keithpage.org, and I'll also put in the deathcafe.com that they can check that out. And I want to thank all our listeners for tuning in to the next chapter with Charlie, and be sure to check us out at our website, thenextchapter.life. And until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.